Welcome back to Offworld, a show where we talk about all things space exploration and pop culture. I'm Ariel Waldman.
And I'm Norm Chan.
And today we are talking about Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery. The first episode just came out. Spoiler alert, we are definitely talking about everything in this episode of Offworld.
And we're going to be joined by a recurring guest, Annalee Newitz. Let's get right to the conversation.
Today I'm really excited because Norm and I have Annalee Newitz here. She is a sci-fi novelist and science writer. Annalee, tell us a little bit about what you do.
I sometimes lie about science and I sometimes tell the truth about science. And I have a podcast called Our Opinions Are Correct, which is about science fiction. So if you need more correct opinions, you can find me there.
Yeah, so Star Trek Discovery Season 2, first episode. That's what we're talking about today. And so I guess my first question really is, what are some of the science and tech appearances that you really appreciated seeing in this first episode?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, we were introduced to a lot of new tech and science in this episode. In fact, some critics have said that's what the whole point of the episode was. We saw the new shuttles, which for some reason act like pneumatic tubes. I was a little confused about that, but I liked the look of it. So that's at least half the battle.
You're talking about the pods they
pods,
flew out in the crazy action scene?
Yeah, the sort of, and they go through this long tube to get out of the ship, which I was like, where are those tubes? This is a lot of space that we're using for these tubes. And then we also learn a lot more about the spore drive, and we get hints that there's this kind of matter that's part of an asteroid that they find that's going to maybe give them a key to repairing the spore drive. So I'm excited about that. They capture an asteroid at the end. I'm actually curious to know what you thought about how realistic that was.
That was fascinating, the way they showed the inside of their shuttle bay, and they deployed Transformer style a gravity machine. Which is that the first time we've seen like
gravity
simulator like in Star Trek? Is that how artificial gravity works? There's a field.
I think it had to do with
We're gonna
tachyons
catch it.
or something.
Yeah.
What happened to our tachyons?
I mean, for me, it's like, so, what I really loved about Season 1 of Star Trek Discovery was so much focus on astrobiology. So you had the spore drive, you had tardigrades, it was all astrobiology all the time. And for someone like me, I was like, this is awesome. I'm always catching tardigrades in my own backyard. But what you could tell that they sort of ripped from the headlines with Season 2 was, interstellar asteroid. They very clearly say this is an interstellar asteroid. And I'm like, this is Star Trek. You're hopping from every asteroid you encounter is going to be an interstellar asteroid. But clearly they pulled it from the headlines of Oumuamua, the interstellar asteroid that came through our solar system that's really elongated. And so I felt like everything about the first episode this season was about sort of Oumuamua and like, what is it like to like go to an interstellar asteroid and try to sample it, and so that was like geeky fun for me.
It was delightful, and we saw how they captured the asteroid. It was actually a little dangerous. Like, they didn't make it seem like all we have to do is use a tractor beam and suddenly it's all fine. It's like, oh no, is it going to hit something? And it's also really spiky. Is that a real thing? As I was watching it, I was like, I'm going to ask Ariel, do asteroids have weird, spiky, like loopy things?
It's an Armageddon portrayal of an asteroid.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But, when you look at the artistic renderings of Oumuamua, it is sort of this elongated, kind of spiky looking asteroid. But what we're learning about asteroids is they come in all shapes and sizes. Some are rounded, some have weathering, some don't. And, I think, Star Trek at the end of the day is still going to like play to pop science culture, which is asteroids are rocky, spiky things. And, who's to say otherwise, because there's a lot of asteroids out there and we've only been to so many. And actually, that's the other thing that I think maybe was one of the reasons why they chose to focus on asteroids, because we've got 2 space probes who are doing asteroid sampling right now, OSIRIS-REx and Hayabusa 2. And both of them have little sampling horns and go give like a little kiss to an asteroid and pick up samples, and they're both supposed to be returning those samples back to Earth. So I feel like that's maybe where they're going with a lot of where they got this inspiration from.
They had a line right in the episode talking about how difficult it would be to land on an asteroid, and which is something that is kind of pulled from the headlines when we read about the probes that we're sending out right now and seeing those low quality GIFs from the asteroids. But I'm like, this is supposed to be 300 years in the future, right? They can travel between stars. Is it still supposed to be that difficult?
I don't know. I mean, there's definitely a scene where, they capture a big part of the asteroid and they're like, it's math, people. And then they have a dorky high five. It's very NASA. Like
the power of math. It was beautiful.
It was geeky.
Yeah.
I just felt like it wasn't earned.
It was not entirely earned because
right?
they didn't. I feel like maybe there might have been a longer scene there that was cut down a little bit so that we could have like mopiness over Spock earlier, which more on that later. But I think that the other thing that they did is they added in a little pseudoscience for us too, because there's this weird gravitational effect that the asteroid is emitting. Like it's
like magnetism.
Yeah, it's getting more magnetized and less, and it's also suddenly changing course, which makes us think it might be some kind of alien artifact. So it's not just that it's like matching the speed of the asteroid, but this is some kind of super magical asteroid.
Well, and the main plot point and sort of the setup for season 2 is that they've found like weird, mysterious signals in a galaxy. And I don't know if that's like relating to fast radio bursts that we keep seeing, like, is it an alien or not? And it's these, maybe it's pulled from that. And actually, one thing I want to talk about in terms of science that made an appearance in the first episode here is the opening scene, which is this beautiful, like, actual imagery from Cassini of Saturn and Saturn's rings, and then also talking about an Southern African tribe's like imagination of creating the Milky Way and everything. What did you think about that?
I loved that. I mean, that was great. And it was, Michael Burnham's voice, our main character who's not the captain, but is the main character. And it was great to see Star Trek thinking about anthropology, because that's what that really was, is it was a nod to anthropology and to human history and how we've been thinking about the stars for so long. And then I loved that the Cassini footage was kind of portrayed the way we portray like World War I footage. Like it's grainy and historical. And so it gives us this deep sense of human history, which is a rare thing on Star Trek. Like usually we're just looking toward the future or toward the past of the future when we return to the original series. So I liked all that. It grounded it in, a lot of different scientific traditions.
And it made me wonder, is this a clue to something, either whether it's just a theme of the season or why Cassini specifically, and why have like the mission logo, the NASA logo, in one of the very first shots. But I really agree, like the opening with Space, the Final Frontier, and then actually adding meaning to that and not just be that line for the sake of that being the line from Star Trek was really cool.
Yeah, I feel like I can't help but, read more into it, which clearly was not the intention. But, this week and the past week, it's been all about how we are learning from Cassini that perhaps the Saturn's rings are only 10 to 100 million years old. So to actually be alive to see them is an incredibly precious moment, and kind of appreciating our place in space-time more has come into the headlines. This was obviously not known to the production crew when they started this, but it's pretty amazing. So we talked a little bit about the science and a little bit about the robotics and the sort of tube-like nature. Were there other things like with the AI or robotics that like made appearances that either of you thought was good or bad? Or
well, they had this whole subplot, this like engineering/medical lab subplot with Tig, and
yes, who was great.
The cameo, I think I had read that she was going to be there, but it was still caught me off guard. Like this was going to be the presence, and hopefully not the only appearance. But as a hacker engineer, keeping a crew alive, it was just like that was probably my favorite part of the episode.
Yeah, Tig Notaro was great. I mean, she always adds presence. But I wondered when I saw that, and she said, like, well, I'm an engineer, and the human body is just a machine. I was like, I wonder if there's doctors watching that being like, no, I don't think so.
And it was a riff off of the McCoy line, right? Like, I'm a doctor, not a
not an X,
and not an X. But this was you're an engineer, not a doctor.
And she's
right?
like, yeah,
I can be both.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, but like the contraptions to rig up, artificial hearts or to keep the other crew alive, I thought it was a really neat scene with I guess these little drone robots also, right? Which we haven't really seen that in Star Trek either.
Yeah, that was cool.
They seemed like a nod to the new Blade Runner a little bit, because that was, remember the creepy little floating bots that we meet in right before they like stab and kill the replicant, and you kind of forget about all the floating bots because that scene was so gross. But they were those kind of tiny floating bots. And so I thought maybe this is kind of a new style that we're imagining.
I think that's possible. And actually that brings me to the lead up to season 2. So there was a release of 4 short treks, which you and I have seen. Norm has not. So we're going to
spoil you.
That's okay.
Full spoilers. But one, you brought up Blade Runner and the episode Calypso, where it's set like 1,000 years into the future. Definitely had a lot of elements that reminded me of the new Blade Runner of there's scenes where he's dancing with an AI and it's this very beautiful, beautifully done. What did you think of the short treks?
It was, I liked several of them. There was only 4. I thought Calypso was amazing, and Michael Chabon wrote it, and he's, famous award-winning author, and he's also going to be working on the new spin-off about Picard.
Yes.
So this was kind of his debut in the Star Trek universe, at least the televised Star Trek universe. And so that was really fun to see. It had a lot of his usual touches, bringing in old pop culture in order to tell a story about the future. So it made me excited about the Picard show. Although I'm kind of more excited about the Michelle Yeoh spinoff, where she's going to be like a badass super spy, because but yeah, I really liked it. And I thought that to go back to your question about science, the AI representation was super interesting, because it was kind of the anti-HAL. The ship has become sentient and...
Yeah, very Blade Runner, very Her, very Wall-E. I feel like it had a lot of reminiscent things of that, but it stood on its own as a beautiful depiction.
Yeah.
One of the other episodes also, one of the reasons why people might want to watch the short treks is because it does give us more context to things that are referenced in season 2. So there's the short trek with Saru and Saru's upbringing and everything. That was kind of an intense episode. And I don't know if you feel like that sort of, in this episode, it shows where Saru comes from, and it shows, we know that his people are eaten by other species, but it shows that it's actually part of their religious and philosophical infrastructure to be sacrificed to other people. And I don't know if that's hinting at bigger political, philosophical things that might show up in season 2, or
it sure made the Federation look like dicks. I really was depressed. I kind of got depressed after that episode, because 2 things. One, as you said, we are introduced to Saru's culture, where these super oppressed people have been taught that it is their job to sacrifice themselves. Nobody seems happy about that.
No.
We kind of see everyone being well, I guess this is what we have to do.
Yeah.
But Saru is really disturbed by it. And so he steals a piece of technology that falls off the oppressor people's ship. And that allows him, after he hacks on it, which is delightful, it allows him to contact the Federation, and he contacts Georgiou when she's on, I guess she's on Discovery, but she's not yet the captain. Early days. So she's maybe an engineering officer or something like that. And she comes to basically rescue him. And when she comes, she's like, you're an outlier because you understand technology among these people who implicitly, she's saying, are all cows and deserve to be slaughtered because they're dumb and haven't shown that they're smart in this techno way.
I mean, I feel like it was sort of pointing towards the early days of the Prime Directive before it fully existed, but they had elements of the Prime Directive where they're we don't want to interfere with people who don't have technology yet, but you have technology, so I made an exception for you. And
that's the nice spin on it. But the negative spin is that there's also this implication that maybe his people don't deserve to be helped because somehow they're not smart, even though we've seen his sister showing all this aptitude with biology and especially plant biology. So, but that doesn't count. So let's not rescue her or anyone else who's being horribly slaughtered by these evil guys. So I kind of felt yes, it's a tragic origin story for Saru, but it gives us another little piece of that early Federation being kind of not that great.
I mean, and still probably not that great, because isn't that an underlying theme of the show, and which kind of emerged even with Next Generation and DS9, is that the utopia that was Gene Roddenberry's vision for the Federation. It's more interesting in dramatic storytelling to show that that's just surface deep, and that you have things like Section 31, and there's still politics, space politics, and even in a utopia, people can be shitty.
Well, it's true.
So, I mean, with season 2, thinking, we've only seen the first episode of it, but, are you all expecting to see politics or culture shift now that we're sort of butting up against the Enterprise in timeline?
Well, that was the big tease at the end of season 1, right? The Enterprise was there, and I'm glad that it was not all about the Enterprise in this first episode. You had just the transference of officers, the one scene in Spock's quarters, but it doesn't feel like it's going to be this 2 tag team ship. Even the costumes, they went back to the Discovery costumes, regardless of how beautiful I thought the take on the original TOS costumes.
Yeah, they looked good.
Yeah, and the way they kind of merge the collar design with the Dickie design the Star Trek outfits have.
Can I ask you guys a super dorky question about the scene on the
what we're
Enterprise?
here for.
I know, but this is okay. At the end of the episode, spoilers, Burnham goes to Spock's quarters on the Enterprise. He's decorated them exactly like his childhood room on Vulcan.
Yeah, they're not great quarters.
They're huge, though.
They're. I mean, stylistically, it looks like some weird dungeon, right?
A museum of Spock.
Yes,
yeah.
But it's but I'm right? He's decorated it to look exactly like his childhood room, and he has his old whatever Vulcan equivalent of an Atari computer there. That's
it's like a speak and spell, or the Etch-a-Sketch.
Yeah, it's like
the Vulcan Etch-a-Sketch.
Yeah,
that's what it was.
So he's got issues. He's
Yes.
living in his childhood bedroom on his starship.
I mean, is there ever a time where Spock doesn't have issues?
But this is bigger. Seems like
more
bigger.
emo Spock. Yeah.
The kid, the toddler Spock they had, was definitely angsty.
I know.
Very angsty. And it's not because of that haircut. It's because he had family problems.
He had a lot of anyway. Okay, so I'm glad that was, because I was like, did she go back to Vulcan? What's happening? Okay, so we've established that. Sorry.
It was definitely his on his quarters of the ship, and that was a Easter egg before the doors open. A really nice cut between her on Discovery to her on the Enterprise.
Yes.
But they had a lot of callbacks to the original series, to Spock's quarters. The room number is supposed to be his room number. So they're trying to do everything they can to tell old Star Trek fans that this is the Enterprise. Like you remember, we're not changing too much of it. Crew contingent's all kind of the same. Dimensions are all the same. I did like that it sounded like the theme of this season would be solving some type of space mystery and not the Klingon War, which was the first season. So in that way feels a little bit more like Star Trek. Exploration, Discovery, name of the show.
Yeah, I'm on a personal level looking forward to having less Klingon stories and plot line. It just felt like it was a lot, and the way they did the language last season bothered me because it was just very, very slow, very slow versions of everything, as opposed to a Game of Thrones style different languages where it goes by fast, you read it fast, but with Klingons it's you're just okay. It's going to take me, 2 minutes to read one sentence, but
they're very deliberate in the way they yell at each other.
Yeah, and we get a lot of scenes in this episode where we establish the universal translator and how that's going to work.
Right.
And that's going to ease a lot of these problems with listening to stately speeches in various alien languages. So that was good. It is odd that Spock is once again chasing red blobs in space. I feel like that's just Spock's mission in life now is is it a red blob? I'm there. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely agree. The other real signal to the audience about the tone change in the season was the moment when Pike asks all of the bridge crew to introduce themselves. First time we've learned their names.
Yeah.
Now we know who the lady is with the weird thing on her head and the cyborg person.
Is the cyborg person, was her name Ariel? I heard Ariel, but that may have been me. I don't know.
Let's just say it's Ariel.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Until we know otherwise.
Am I in this? Yeah.
She's the only one who gave her rank too, because probably
she was
being the
lieutenant
cyborg
colonel or something.
She's I'm going to give my rank because that's my operating procedure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she might be a cyborg or she might just be a really augmented human. We don't know.
Yes.
So hopefully, I really want the Ariel cyborg episode. Assuming that.
Let's go for it.
Well, that's the thing.
It
feels like there's an opportunity now to develop these characters and that give them lines and to have them interact with each other, not just call and response to, the 3 main characters, presumably of the show. which feels more Star Trek, right? This is supposed to feel like a family on the bridge, and yes, you have Stamets, and yes, there's Tilly, and there's a lot of funny Tilly in this episode.
Yes,
there was. Yes,
super awkward Tilly.
Say nice. Less. Yeah.
But yeah, the bridge crew becoming coming into their own.
Yeah.
Which is also interesting. Like, does Discovery have a Spock-like character? Not Spock. Like every Star Trek has had, the character that tries to learn to be human, and are we past that in Star Trek now?
I feel like, there's a lot of possibilities for that, right? Because now we've introduced some of the bridge crew. I also think that Tilly was that character last season because we learned that she was on the spectrum and she has a difficult time, reading other people's emotional reactions and things like that. And she's having to learn how to interact. And I felt like they were dialing that back a lot in this episode. They were saying like, oh, it's more that she's just kind of quirky. And they kind of pulled back on it being because she's on the spectrum and more just because she is kind of a goof.
But again, in the short trek, one of the short treks was dedicated pretty much to her.
It's
and
true.
She was awkward AF. And I was wondering, I was talking to my husband about it, going was there anyone as awkward as her, in any of the previous Star Treks? And he said Data. Yeah, exactly. And so she might be sort of the new Data, but she's not android, she's human.
Right, but about that Spock role, that is, Data was kind of that Spock character of humans, you are so odd. Why do you have these feelings and expressions?
And
7 of 9 on Voyager,
That's right.
Odo to some extent on DS9.
Yeah, she's not cold. She's not she has actually a lot of compassion. She's just awkward, which I don't know. I like it because, in my experiences where I've had the amazing chance to interview astronauts, I always loved the ones that were just so I'm in space and then I screwed something up and I didn't want to tell anyone because it was so embarrassing. I was like, oh my God, I'm screwing up everything and I'm in space. And I kind of just love showing more of an awkwardness in space that not everyone knows what the hell they're doing,
And that the range of ways that humans can be awkward aren't just, I don't have emotions. It can be I'm just I don't really know when to stop talking. That's another mode of having the same problem or the same awkwardness. So also though, we're gonna see Spock this season.
Bearded Spock or
super bearded Spock. Yeah,
Emo
he's
Spock.
So we have a Spock character.
Yeah.
So we maybe don't need as much of that because we're gonna actually explore all of Spock's sibling issues, all of Burnham's sibling issues, which I was like, didn't Burnham have daddy issues last season? Can she just have issues that don't involve a male family member? I don't know, work issues, trying to solve a problem, writing an algorithm. That could be a thing. Nope, it's got to be brother issues. So yeah, hopefully that'll turn out to be an interesting storyline. What do you guys, are you eager to see Spock again?
It's hard for me, as someone who, I wouldn't say I'm a Trekkie, but I've been following all the different, the movies, the shows, all these different things. And so for me, certainly watching Spock and Pike, it's hard for me to decouple from the movies because there were characters built up in the movies that I really got attached to. So I got attached to the newest movie version of Spock and the newest movie version of Pike. And I think, while this is a completely different production crew and completely different companies who are doing Star Trek, I think it's very difficult that you've got a whole generation of people who are now raised on these current characters. And you've seen this issue with Spider-Man and other series where it gets really difficult to untangle from things that we've grown to like. So yeah, I'm a little nervous about Spock showing up in this season because I don't know, because I got really attached to the character in the movies lately.
Zach Quinto is great. He's a great Spock. I was attached to him. I was attached to his relationship with Uhura, which sadly that went away, but that was great. And I don't know, what I really want to be convinced of is that this isn't just a gimmick, that it isn't just the Spock gimmick to kind of be fan bait. And, I want him to actually feel like he's essential to the series and isn't just brother issues, and so I think that we'll find out over the course of the season. We can't know that yet in this episode.
And I don't want them to solo this. I don't need this portrayal of Spock to be the revelation of how all the Easter eggs or why Spock became the Spock we know from the original series. some stuff can be mystery. Just let this be its own character named Spock. Yes, he was on the Enterprise. It's a matter of convenience, and let it be a good story on its own. I do like Pike character, and I do think you're right. It cribs a lot from the performance of Bruce Greenwood from the films, that kind of confidence and easygoingness. I think it'll be different captain than what Jason Isaacs was in Lorca.
Yeah. So I guess my final question is, what are your hopes and dreams for season 2? Now that we've passed season 1, we saw what they did there. Are you hoping it's totally different? Are you hoping it keeps the same vibe? What are your hopes and dreams for season 2 for Star Trek Discovery?
I really liked kind of what we talked about, the vibe where it's much more about the family of the ship. And I think by the end of the episode, we started to have that kind of warm feeling that these were people who were there for each other and that this was a captain that maybe they could trust. I'm not that into the idea of Pike being captain. He seems like a Lee Press-on white guy, which, he may end up rising to the occasion. I just felt like in this episode, it was kind of like, hello, I'm here to save the day. And
Zap Brannigan.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just kind of like, okay, I didn't really need you, but fine. Your hair is kind of cute, I guess. Whatevs. Like, I'm much more interested in Burnham. I mean, she's a much more rich and developed character. So I like that. I'm really looking forward to a more hopeful Trek, which is what Alex Kurtzman, the showrunner, has promised. My hope is that we get a lot of interesting space discovery stuff, like just weird science. Like, that's what we're in it for, and weird civilizations. Like, let's actually go back to visiting planets and seeing some intriguing other worlds and not just fighting the Klingons, which I think that is over. We're done with fighting the Klingons for now.
They'll be a part of the season. We saw that in the preview.
They'll have hair.
Yes, slightly redesigned, but yeah, it won't be about them.
Yeah.
I hope it also won't be about the ship itself. So much of the first season was about, look at the novelty and of this new experimental ship. But from all Star Trek shows, like, they're less about the ship and more about the crew. So I agree, more about the crew.
Yeah, certainly my hope is more weird science stuff and stuff where I can see sort of where they got inspirations from, like real science happening now. But also, I guess I have a hope that maybe, I have no idea if they've been given more money or not, but hopefully their depictions of alien life sort of expand. And we saw a very brief moment where it's they're in an elevator and one of the alien species sneezes on someone and it's actually green goop on his face. I don't know, stuff like that. It's small, but I kind of hope that they've gotten more money or something so that they can better flesh out different species that they encounter and interact with.
We do know that Alex Kurtzman has been given a huge amount of money to develop a bunch of properties in the Star Trek universe for CBS All Access. So we're going to have those 2 spin-offs. I think we're going to have more of the shorts probably.
That would be great.
And I think there may be other stuff in the works too. So yeah.
My pipe dream is, if we're going to get more than one Star Trek show this year, let's have a mystery or a problem that spans all of them.
Oh.
And not
we
just
want the crossover.
And not just the crossover between the Michelle Yeoh show and Discovery, but let's tie it into the Picard show, which is 100 years in the future, because problem solving across time was all good things.
I love problem solving across time. Do you want to bring back the temporal Cold War? Is that what you want? Because that's what happens if you leave out time travel, is you get temporal Cold War.
Yeah, so I think those are all great things. And yeah, stuff spanning time, it would be really a luxurious way to get a full sort of diversity of portrayals of this universe. That would be really great, or multiverses for all we know. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And
thanks for having me.
We're looking forward to watching the rest of Star Trek.
Same here.
So I'm really looking forward to watching the rest of Star Trek Discovery and season 2. And yeah, we talked about our hopes and dreams for it. And hopefully it just won't disappoint.
We'll have to come back at the end of this season, see if any of our predictions were correct. But we do have a whole season of Offworld, this show for you out there, with more talks about science fiction stories, space exploration stories. Stay tuned for that. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't to yet. Or if you just want to listen to the audio version, we also have Offworld as a podcast, and you can find that on all your favorite podcast apps. We'll see you next time.